Krishna because new people don't know Jai Radha Madhava. So I forgot. I had intended to put Jai Radha Madhava on the screen. And I think Dylan was the only one who didn't know the words, but it's a nice song. And the meaning, so that you know the meaning at least, these are names of Krishna, specifically Krishna in Vrindavan. And Vrindavan is the place where Krishna performed his childhood pastimes. And the childhood pastimes are most charming, enchanting, transcendentally appealing to the heart. So each of the names, they're indicating a pastime or a feature of Krishna. And it's said that these names have some very special potency. Amongst other names of God, the potency to stimulate ecstatic love towards Krishna and Vrindavan. So we like singing that song. The kind of tradition started long, long ago, and Prabhupada began singing, and so we all just followed Prabhupada's practice of singing Jai Radha Madhava. So, you can see the topic that was requested for me to speak about. And I think I'll start with a little Prabhupada story. Everybody likes Prabhupada story. This is one I didn't just hear about, I was there. How many have been to Vrindavan? How many would like to go to Vrindavan? Let's go to Vrindavan through sound. So the principal deity, the deity in the central altar is Krishna Balaram. So it's called Krishna Balaram Mandir. And every morning, as he did in other places, as he did when he was visiting here in Atlanta, Piedmont Park, is it the place where he went? Piedmont? Do you have a morning walk? Piedmont Park? Not far from here. So, he didn't have to go to a park in Vrindavan because everything, at least at that time, was agricultural land. Now when you go to Vrindavan, it's chaos. But at the time that the temple property was purchased, it was purposefully remote from downtown, the well-developed urban commercial place of Vrindavan town. So every morning at 6 o'clock, very punctual, Srila Prabhupada would go for a morning walk. And it was kind of a random arrangement who would go with Prabhupada in the morning walk. And I tried to take advantage as much as possible to go on those morning walks. And the way it worked was, Prabhupada, his quarters, those of you who've been to Krishna Balaram Mandir, you can remember. In the back area is Prabhupada's quarters, and he would walk along the side of the temple, heading towards the front gate. Of course, there was no samadhi. There's a samadhi there where Prabhupada's transcendental body is placed, but then it was just the fountain, and he walked around and went out the front gate and turned right. And across the street wasn't shops and crowds of people beeping their horns. It was just agricultural fields. And he went to the right, and it's agriculture fields, left and right, and left and right, and left and right. And he went for a long distance, about 20-25 minutes, and then would turn around and come back. Different things would happen at different times, but that was the pattern. So one particular morning, as we were approaching the temple to come back, we could hear the kirtan. The devotees were ready to receive Prabhupada and, Hare Krishna kirtan in the background. Often in the distance. And then Prabhupada stopped, put his cane down, and he wanted to make some point of emphasis. He sharply put his cane into the pavement and looked around and said, "Where are the devotees?" Because you could hear the devotees in the kirtan, and they were on the morning walk. And then Prabhupada said, whenever there is some opportunity to be in the physical presence of the spiritual master, one should take that opportunity. Indicating he wanted to see more devotees on the morning walk. And then he said something that this evening's talk is about. He said, there are two ways to associate with and to serve the spiritual master. He said, one is called vaku, means physical presence, and the other is vani, V-A-N-I, vani, that means instruction. So whenever there's opportunity, one should seek vaku. But even when there is vaku, he went on to say, even more important than doing some physical, personal service for the spiritual master is hearing from the spiritual master. More important. Even in his physical presence. And in his physical absence, no vaku is available, then vani. So he was highlighting vani or vani. Take your choice. So instructions. And it's serving, even during Prabhupada's time when he was physically on the planet, the personal service was performed for him by following the instructions, vani. But to follow instructions, you first have to receive them. And sometimes, you don't know how it is, sometimes we have filters and we hear what we want to hear. And we don't hear what we don't want to hear. Or we hear what we want to hear, even something else is said because that's what we want to hear. And sometimes you don't even hear because we have beans in our ears, we just can't hear. So the quality of hearing is very important. How to serve, how we can perform personal service to Srila Prabhupada is to hear with rapt attention or with ardent hearing, sometimes you would say, or another time with heart and mind. Here, of course, the ear is needed, but with heart and mind. So how do you hear with the heart? We're going to speak about that a little bit, but that's coming a little bit later. Srila Prabhupada, what he heard was instructions from his spiritual master. And what he heard was from his spiritual master and from his spiritual master in disciplic succession, going back to Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, by speaking the message of devotional service, we were somewhere, or somebody, last night, somebody didn't know who was Lord Chaitanya. So we had to explain who was Lord Chaitanya. And Lord Chaitanya is Krishna himself, not an expansion of Krishna or an avatar of Krishna or anything like that. He's Krishna himself, who took on the mood and of his own devotee to teach us the way of devotional service. And the way of devotional service, as the illustration shows, you water the tree. Then you water the tree, all the trunk and branches, and leaves and twigs and flowers and everything gets water. Pour water on the root of the tree. Part of the teaching of Srimad Bhagavatam. So find out the cause of all causes, the origin of everything, find out the absolute truth, and place your service propensity there. In the mood of Radharani, or the mood of the residents of Braja. That's what Lord Chaitanya taught. And from that grew the Chaitanya tree. And there's different branches, as we see. The principal branches are the Panchatattva, and then sub-branches and branches of those branches. And the tree, the Chaitanya tree, bore fruits, and the fruits were the fruits of love of God. And Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was very busy, happily busy, in distributing the fruits of love of God. Only he found that there were too many fruits, so he wanted helpers. So he enlisted others to help him distribute the fruits of love of God. But in order to distribute the fruits of love of God, they had to grow love of God. They had to have the fruit to distribute. And in turn, that was passed on. Principal follower, Rupa Goswami, and of course all the other followers of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and then in disciplic line, down to our founder Acharya, Srila Prabhupada. So we can serve even in physical absence through these nice teachings. And principal amongst the teachings we know is this gift of Srimad Bhagavatam and the holy name. Nice companion set of activities, the chanting of the holy name and Srimad Bhagavatam. Now, some of the persons here have seen some of these slides because I was told that I spoke on this before. No problem hearing it again and again and again. No problem. There's a very nice passage in Chaitanya Charitamrita. This is the life of Lord Chaitanya, one of the biographies of his life, where when he was living in Puri, one of his daily activities, after rising early in the morning and taking his bath and going to the Jagannath temple and seeing Lord Jagannath and dancing in ecstasy, he would then receive prasad from the pujaris. And of course, he went to his devotee Haridas Thakur to deliver Jagannath prasad to Haridas. And they would discuss topics about Krishna together for some time. And then every day, according to Chaitanya Charitamrita, he then went to the place where his dear devotee Gadadhar Pandit made his residence. And that place was Tota Gopinath. Tota means garden. So it was in a very remote place where Gopinath, the deity, was being worshipped by Gadadhar Pandit. And Chaitanya Mahaprabhu would see the deity, darshan of the deity, he danced before the deity. He was in ecstasy of love of Radha for Gopinath before the deity. And then after some time he would sit down and he would hear his devotee recite Srimad Bhagavatam. Gadadhar Pandit was expert at many things, but two principal things: the worship of the deity of Gopinath and reciting Bhagavatam. And every day, for hours, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu would sit and listen. The Supreme Personality of Godhead, in the mood of Srimati Radharani, would hear Srimati Radharani, who was Gadadhar Pandit, reciting Srimad Bhagavatam. That must have been out of sight. Too bad they didn't have digital cameras and things like that kind of take footage and play back the morning classes. And he would particularly relish pastimes like the story of Prahlad Maharaj and the story of Dhruva Maharaj. And after hearing the whole story being narrated from beginning to end, Mahaprabhu would say it again, say it again, say it again. And he would say it again, and say it again. He didn't say, I've heard that one, I went to tell another story. Because transcendental topics, particularly Srimad Bhagavatam, but other transcendental topics, it is like it's like making sandwiches on the deities There's sandalwood paste all over Madan Mohan and the forehead of Jagannath and Balaram, and the Gornatai deities just on their forehead. So to make sandalwood paste, some of you probably have done. How many have made sandalwood paste? Oh, more than half. Okay. So for those of you who haven't, too bad. But we'll teach you how to do it. And maybe one day you'll be very fortunate and the devotees, the pujaris, will let you make some sandalwood paste. So you take it's just a piece of wood, look like, and it is, wood. And maybe a piece as big as your fist or something like that, or smaller, whatever. And three things: piece of sandalwood, a flat rock, and a little water, not too much. And a few drops of water, and you just do like this. And chant Hare Krishna, or whatever your favorite song is, and hear some stories about Krishna. Just keep going and going and going and going and going. And what happens is, the wood becomes soft, and then it becomes paste. And then a little more water, and keep going and going. When they have Chandanyatra in Mayapur, there's some devotees here from Mayapur, they make buckets. I mean, buckets. It's like a marathon. Sandalwood paste, making marathon, and hundreds of devotees for hours every day, for days, and they completely covered the devotees, the deities, in sandalwood. So, when you make, it says repeated motion, but it's very fragrant. You can't smell the fragrance nearly as much as when you start doing this. And then the whole room becomes filled with the fragrance of sandalwood, and it has a very cooling and soothing effect. So recitation of Srimad Bhagavatam is like that. It's like making sandalwood. Just say it again, and say it again, and say it again, and say it again. And the fragrance and the sweetness and the cooling effect is experienced. So all of that is to say, if you've seen some of this already, that's no problem. Hear it again. Now, I want to make reference to Canto 10. Canto 10, just now looking, yeah, these are three, I'll take that one. Canto 10, chapter 2. Who knows what that chapter is about? Canto 10, chapter 2. Prayers by the demigods. To Lord Krishna, who is within the womb of Devaki, who is in the prison house of Kamsa. So, the demigods are informed by Brahma. Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, is going to take birth very soon. He is in the womb of Devaki. Go and offer your prayers to Krishna before he takes his birth. So they go and they offer prayers. I'm going to read text 31 in chapter 2. It's one of their prayers. O Lord, who resemble the shining sun, you are always ready to fulfill the desire of your devotee, and therefore you are known as a desire tree, Kalpataru. When acharyas completely take shelter under your lotus feet in order to cross the fierce ocean of nescience, they leave behind on earth the method by which they cross. And because you are very merciful to your other devotees, you accept this method to help them. So there's a boat. that Srila Prabhupada left behind. The same boat that he used to cross the ocean, the fierce ocean of nations, he left behind in the form of Srimad Bhagavatam. Because the instruction Prabhupada was given, how did he serve his spiritual master in his physical absence? By fulfilling his instruction, Bani. And one of those important instructions was present the message of Lord Chaitanya to the English-speaking parts of the world. Now it just so happens that the teaching of Lord Chaitanya is Srimad Bhagavatam, or Srimad Bhagavatam is the teaching of Lord Chaitanya. Either way you'd like to say it works, because they're equal. A equals A and A equals A. They're the same. So Srila Prabhupada had the instruction to give the teaching to Lord Chaitanya, so he brought Srimad Bhagavatam. And his dedicated mission was to provide us with Srimad Bhagavatam. Now this image means something special for me. Again, it's a little anecdotal, personal, but in 1970 and 1971, Srila Prabhupada visited the Henry Street, famous Henry Street Temple in Brooklyn, and I had the good fortune of serving Srila Prabhupada during that time in the capacity of temple commander. Now, those days, there was no training for anything. There was no job description for anything. Just being temple commander, unspoken job assignment was that anything that needs to get done, you have to see that it gets done. And if you can't find somebody to do it, you do it yourself. That was the job description. So, the first time Srila Prabhupada visited, there were over 100 devotees living in the temple. And then when Prabhupada visited, there was an extra 150 devotees. So a lot of people to look after. And a lot of vegetables to be cut, and a lot of floors to be cleaned, and this and that, and so many things. But of foremost attention when Prabhupada was visiting was the care of Prabhupada. So the part that I had to play was guarding Prabhupada's quarters. And that the Henry Street Temple was a double brownstone building. Now maybe in Atlanta it doesn't mean anything to you Atlanta folks. But it's a 4-story building made of brownstone, and they were side by side. We didn't own it, it was rented. And so from the sidewalk, you had to walk up about 4, 5, 6 steps, and then you got to the ground floor. You got to walk down, you get to the basement. So the ground floor on the left-hand side was the temple room, bigger than this, but bigger. And then the altar. And then the other side of the brownstone was Prabhupada's quarters, which was the mirror of the temple room, and then the back was his quarters. And so the entrance into Prabhupada's quarters was 2. One was the doorway between the 2 buildings, and then the other was in the back, because there was a garden, real tiny garden and flowers and grass and things like that. Some landscaping garden. So it was really easy to get somebody to stand at the doorway to say you can't come in. Unless you got an authorization from somebody back there, and I want to see it right, and you just, don't let anybody in. People were really happy to do that one. And then even at night, because the door opened into Prabhupada's quarters, so somebody could just roll out their sleeping bag, put their head against the door, and nobody can come in without banging them in the head, waking them up. So it was really easy to get somebody to do that one. And then in the back, where the garden was, because this was Brooklyn, sometimes people would climb over the 10-foot wall that had glass on the top and come inside and steal stuff from the TV room and go back home and have a party. It's Brooklyn, so, we had to guard Prabhupada's quarters because we didn't want anything to happen to him. So getting someone to guard Prabhupada's quarters during the day, that wasn't difficult either. But at night, and if you're the temple commander, if you can't find somebody to do it, you gotta do it yourself. So I did it myself, because you have to guard Prabhupada's quarters. You don't want anything to happen to our spiritual master while he's visiting us. So I was in the back, and I watched Prabhupada's schedule from, through the window. And, at around 9-ish, he would go to the large front room, like this room this big, and just had a plain wooden floor, flat oak floor. And he would sit with harmonium just himself and sing Narottam Das Thakur or Bhakti, some bhajans. 20 minutes or so, completely immersed in the message of the bhajan. Then he'd get up and go to his room, his light would go out, I assume he took rest. And then around 11:30 to 12, the light would go on. 2.5 hours, that's it. And then light would go on in the bathroom, and then he'd come out of the bathroom, and he'd sit at his desk like this. The desk was, he would sit down on a little platform like this, and then the desk that was, about middle of his chest high, giant desk, with, as you see, these giant books, the kind that open like this. And then another one. That was the commentary of the Acharyas. Took a whole suitcase to carry the commentary of the Acharyas, because at night, when we're upstairs snoozing, our spiritual master was downstairs translating. And running his fingers across the pages and holding his dictaphone and dictating the Bhaktivedanta purports. Every night, for hours, 4 hours. Then at something like 4 o'clock, he'd go and whatever he did, take a bath or something, come out and chant japa, then at 6 o'clock go for the morning walk, and 7 o'clock come back reading tea. He was so 4 hours every night. While young American 20-year-olds got all this energy, and we were exhausted from all the work that we did during the day, and calmed out, and our founder Acharyas providing the boat for us to cross the fierce ocean of material existence. Because that was the boat that he used, and he left it behind him for us. I can tell you, that made a deep impression. Every night for a week I watched Prabhupada do that. And I probably dozed off a few times too, but he didn't. He was fixed in serving the next generation. And not only the next generation, but in his own words, 10,000 years. To the next generation and the next generation and the next generation. So they would have the means to cross the ocean of material existence through his Vani. And he instructed us to take seriously reading his books. And he received this instruction from Bhaktisiddhanta, as mentioned. And the first time they met, a very well-known story in the Hare Krishna movement, up on a rooftop in Calcutta, Prabhupada met Bhaktisiddhanta, and the very first instruction Prabhupada received was the same one. Go to the English-speaking parts of the world. You're an educated man, you speak English. Take this teaching to Lord Chaitanya. Prabhupada objected. Bhaktisiddhanta defeated him. Prabhupada said, in my childhood I was always very expert at debate. I never lost an argument. But I was happy to be defeated by Bhaktisiddhanta. And I accepted. Here's a qualified person to carry forward the teachings of devotion, the pure teachings of Lord Chaitanya. Then there was another instruction that Prabhupada received from Bhaktisiddhanta some years later. There's Prabhupada holding the hand of one of his sons, and the occasion was in Vrindavan, while going around Radha Kund. Bhaktisiddhanta was sharing with Prabhupada if he get money, print books. He was close the door. He was, Bhaktisiddhanta was unhappy that this marble Bhagbazar temple in downtown Calcutta had been donated already. Disciples were quabbling over whose room was who, and who would have which space, and who was more important, and territorial thing. So he said, if I could, I would just sell the marble and books. So that went into Prabhupada's heart. When he received funds, he printed books abundantly. If you remind me at the end, I'll tell one more Prabhupada story about printing books. Remind me at the end. So he had these two instructions, and he went after accepting, or he took the sannyas order in Vrindavan, and rooms were arranged by the resident Goswami at the time of the Radharaman temple, who had great affection for Prabhupada. He arranged a room with one of the other Goswamis to stay at the Radha Damodar temple. 2 little rooms. And this is one of those little rooms. And looking out the window where he was sitting doing some writing, you could see the samadhi of Rupa Goswami, Bhajan Kutir, and separately another structure, the samadhi of Rupa Goswami. So he was deeply meditating on the mercy of Rupa Goswami, but he was also feeling very humble, not capable of fulfilling this instruction that Bhaktisiddhanta gave. In a private discussion, Prabhupada relayed, not there. There's supposed to be a little window that pops up where Rupa Goswami says he appeared in that little room and said to Prabhupada, Maharaj, don't worry, you will be successful. This is a very important mission your Guru Maharaj has given you, and just continue, give the message, have no fear, I will be with you. Something, not verbatim, but something like that. What's not showing here is what Prabhupada actually said, he said. So Prabhupada took courage. He felt support from Rupa Goswami, personal support. Wow. And he came to America, and he fulfilled the instruction. And many of us had this good fortune of celebrating ISKCON 50. And anybody that knows a little bit about Srila Prabhupada knows that whenever there was some success, Prabhupada would celebrate and then give the next challenge. What's next? Just a little anecdotal. Remember this very clearly. In the Boston temple where I started, there were only 4 or 5 temples at that time, and Prabhupada had bumped up. He decided how many Back to Godhead magazines would be published. Whatever the number was, it was double. It went from 5,000 to 10,000 or something like that. And he said, Los Angeles so many, New York so many, Boston so many, Montreal so many. We thought, how are we going to do it? But he gave the order, so we did it. And then Prabhupada celebrated. Very nice. And now we'll print 20,000. And we'll summon it to this temple. And we're thinking, how are we going to do it? So he was always giving us fresh challenges. And somehow, you know what the somehow was, the mercy of Krishna and the mercy of his representative, it somehow happened. And then something else, and then something else. And so it was always, so those that understood the mood and the way of our friend Acharya are naturally thinking, well, let's get ready to celebrate ISKCON 100. Now some of us are not going to be around, we're too old. But that some of you are young enough at least that you can be around. I spoke like this some time ago. The one boy who was 9 years old, his mother was prompting, you know how mothers are. Go ahead, ask your questions. And he was shy. So he just sat for a bit and said, well, actually, I do have a question. What is it that a 9-year-old can do today to help make sure there's an ISKCON 100? I said, wow. I gave him an answer. So now I'm speaking to all of you. You're not 9-year-olds, but how old are you? 9. May you become one of ISKCON's leaders, and as you get older, and you look like a happy devotee, people will probably like you. You will attract many people to Krishna by your joyful disposition. So there's a group, I mentioned this earlier today, serving the GBC called Organization Development Committee. And those of you in the corporate sector, you know what that is. I just learned it. Organization Development Committee of the GBC. And that group requested one devotee whose name is Gaura Krishna Prabhu. He is from Russia. English is his second language, and it sounds like it. But he's in charge of the BBT, and he volunteered to do some research. It took him 3 years, and the research was looking back in history, religious organizations that lasted, and why, and those that didn't last, and why. And divisions under Islam and Christianity and Buddhism and Judaism, and which ones made it, which ones didn't, and why. And this man is heading in the direction of genius. Because the second language thing was really hard to understand what he was saying, but we could understand it was brilliant what he came up with. Very, very thoroughly researched. And it got distilled down to what we now call the 4 generations. So here's the first generation. That's meaning Prabhupada was physically present, and they were his disciples. And the second generation is after Prabhupada's departure. His teachings are there, but his physical presence isn't there. And then the third generation, notice, is getting a little faded. The presence of the founder Acharya becomes less with the third generation, and the fourth generation much less. And that's the risk when the person who inspired ISKCON to take place, of course, his spiritual master inspired him, but Prabhupada did the work, and so we one can call it the fading Acharya ? Or the danger of the 4 generations. And once again, the 4 generations is the Acharya's presence. This is ISKCON, but it's all these religious organizations. There's some that made it, some that didn't. And then the next generation, the disciples of the founder Acharya, and then the disciples of his disciples, and then come the disciples of his disciples. So the presence of Srila Prabhupada becomes less, and here's a chart that shows the same thing. This is the 3rd time you're getting the same idea. So the first generation is across the top, where we have Srila Prabhupada's presence. When he said something, did something, if there was some question, you could go and ask him. What was your intention when you said this, did that? What was the intention? What did you want us to understand from that? And he could explain. And then there were some issues over there on the left, and contextually sometimes he said this and sometimes he said that, or did this and did that. You have to understand the intention from the context of what he said and did. And those of you that have read the biographies of Prabhupada, besides they're wonderful, you'll find that there's different versions of the same thing. Yes? Yes? Yes. And then, but there's his instructions. So what this devotee, Gaur Krishna, found was those that lasted. The founder, like Mohammed, I remember this very clearly, he insisted, don't write anecdotal stuff, because the context won't be clear. My written instructions, that's what's really important. Make sure that you have all the followers know what my instructions are. Instructions, 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 and therefore it lasted. Then after the presence of that, the charismatic person that starts, or the leader that starts the religious group, when they're gone, the intention is sometimes questionable. So we have these other three things, and then, so this third generation, that's mostly all of you, not all of you, but mostly all of you. Instructions is underlined, because your generation needs to know what Prabhupada's instructions are so that you can fulfill them, so that you can serve his instructions. Within those instructions, you'll also find the intention, but you have to know the instructions in order to understand the intention behind the instructions. So, let's say it negatively. If there's one thing, if you want to make sure that there isn't an ISKCON 100, then don't read Prabhupada's books. Or, positively, if there's one thing you can do to play your part to help make sure that there's an ISKCON 100, is read and study carefully Prabhupada's books. Because through his books, you can understand what he wants. And the path to get to the other side of the fierce ocean of material existence. And as you're making your way, you can invite other people on board that boat of transcendental knowledge. That's some nice way to serve Srila Prabhupada in our present time. So I'm going to take one example out of so many, and what's the intention of our founder Acharya about the topic of Varnashram? Have you ever been involved in a discussion on the topic of Varnashram? Dylan, you don't know what that is. It's a description of the occupation and the social order of society, the social structure that's conducive for spiritual growth. So, it's found in the Vedas. So, question. Did Prabhupada intend for us or not to establish Varnashram? There's some quotes over here where he would say, in this age of Kali, it's not possible, and therefore instead of Varnashram Dharma, it's the Yuga Dharma, Harinam Sankirtan, do Harinam Sankirtan. Vijay. Then there's some quotes over here, including extensive morning walk conversations where he said he wanted it. So what was it? Is his intention? Did he want it or not want it? And we held a exploring Varnashram conference in our farm community in Pennsylvania. Just to, not to say something definitive on the topic, but just to explore the topic. And the conclusion was, not definitive, but yes, but not the ancient style or the previous Yuga style of Varnashram. The form, no, but the essence, yes. And then what would that look like and how to get there is another topic. But he wanted it. Essence, yes. Form, not exactly looking the same. So, there's a group of devotees that, in my estimation, have made the greatest progress with Varnashram. That's in Hungary. There's a farm, there's not only the farm, the New Brajadam. Go online and check out New Brajadam, it's fantastic. There's devotees that are living in a sustainable agricultural community with no electricity, no running water, and they're happy. And the climate is colder than Atlanta. It's, Europe, Northern Europe, Eastern Europe. So that community, they have both the farm and the Budapest, and they have many preaching centers and so forth. The senior devotees get together on a monthly basis for the past several years, and they just discuss varnashram, what did Prabhupada want and how to do it. So one of the things that they came up with was to take the instructions that are found in Srimad Bhagavatam Canto 7, because Srimad Bhagavatam Canto 7 is spoken by Narada to Maharaj Yudhisthira in the presence of Krishna, and long story short, because of time, one of the topics that's discussed is Maharaj Yudhisthira says, wow, Prahlad Maharaj was a pure devotee, and I'm supposed to be the king, and part of the duty of the king to help the citizens become elevated in their life, and could you instruct me, Narada, how I can guide my citizens to come to that stage? I'm keeping it simple. And Narada says, sure, great question, Maharaj Yudhisthira, suited for an exalted king like you. The method is pure bhakti. To get to pure bhakti, you have to follow the codes of varnashram, the social order, social and spiritual orders. But before you do that, you have to be a human being. I'm making it simple. And so they, for a whole year, they were studying these verses from Canto 7, Chapter 11. It's the first chapter right after the Prahlad and Hiranyakashipu and Dodashini narration. It ends Chapter 10, Chapter 11, this discussion comes. And there's these 30 characteristics of a human being. The last 9 are characteristics of devotional service, but I have 2 terms out of the 21. Swadhyaya, which is our topic for this evening. Swadhyaya and Titiksha. Swadhyaya is a human characteristic. It means reading of scripture. And that and the others that are highlighted there, they're human traits that if you can't be a human, you can't follow varnashram, you can't render devotional service properly. And I'm going to give some examples. 2. One is Jad Bharat. Jad Bharat, those of you who are familiar with the Bhagavatam, in his 2 lives previously, he was a great king, Bharat Maharaj, who died remembering a deer. He became a deer. In the next life he became Jad Bharat. He was engaged as a palanquin carrier of this king over here named Rahugana. And Rahugana was a virtuous man, but covered. He was deluded by, I'm the king, and you're not carrying the palanquin carefully. You better watch out or you're going to get it. I'm the king. So it happened twice, because Jad Bharat was being careful not to step on ants, and the king was a little uncomfortable because he wasn't carrying in sequence with the other carriers that didn't mind stepping on ants. So he blasted him, and Jad Bharat, for his whole life, he hadn't spoken anything. He was behaving as if he was deaf and dumb. He wasn't deaf and dumb, he was just being careful, because in his previous life he wasn't sufficiently careful, so he wasn't going to make that same mistake again. But then he spoke, and he spoke in such transcendental way that the king went, wow. He got off the palanquin, paid obeisances, fell at his feet and said, please forgive me, I didn't have any understanding how exalted who you are. And the word that you spoke was so high, I couldn't understand them all. Could you say it again? Bring it down a little bit and help me get the message properly, because I want to understand, I want to learn from you. So one of those verses is, he is really direct, Jad Bharat, speaking to the king. You are cruel and unkind. Yet, due to false prestige, you are thinking that you are protecting the citizens. This is ludicrous. You were such a fool that you could not have been adored as a great man in an assembly of persons advanced for knowledge. So, one of the results of swadhyaya, or study of scriptures, is you have the foundation of knowing what's what on an authoritative way, just like, you hold something up to a light and you can see better what it is. So the light of transcendental knowledge is the Vedas. And Jad Bharat had transcendental knowledge, and he could understand, my dear king, you're a fool. Because kings look after their subject, but you're exploiting your subjects. You're treating them harshly, cruelly, and meanly, and speaking unfairly. It gives a whole long list of his atrocities. You don't deserve to be called a king. You're a fool. Filled with pride. The king took it. I mean, tell that to Donald Trump, and what's he going to do? But Rahugana was a qualified person. He had forgotten, but if you don't act according to knowledge, then you're not qualified. So you have to be a human being before a follower of Varnashram, before coming to the stage of pure devotional service. Confirmed. When we were in Mayapur conducting our discussions on these topics, the first verse that was spoken by Devaki Nandan from Singapore, very nice devotee, and he was speaking the words of praise that Lord Vishnu, who had come for the installation of Prithu Maharaj as the king, there's Lord Vishnu over there on the far left, he was speaking some appreciation of King Prithu, saying, unlike Rahugana, he was saying, you're qualified because you're very tolerant. And he said specifically, even if someone is trampling on your head, you're the king and you'll tolerate it because you're interested not in your own aggrandizement, you're interested in the welfare of the citizens. That doesn't mean the king won't say anything, do anything, but not out of irritation and, who are you? I'm the king. You better watch out, he's going to get you. Another scriptural reference is Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. He was not only he was offended very severely by the son of one of his devotees, Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya. His son is pictured here, Amoga. And Amoga, by offending Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, contracted cholera, and he was dying on his deathbed. And Chaitanya Mahaprabhu heard this, that due to the reaction of his offenses, he was suffering so badly. So Chaitanya Mahaprabhu came to see him and placed his hand on his heart and said, Amoga, you're a Brahmana. And the Brahmana means that the Lord is within the heart. The heart has to be clean for the Lord to sit there. And all this contamination has been there in your heart. Please give it up. Please be relieved of that, so that you can be situated properly. Moga sat up, his cholera was gone, his heart was cured. Not only of the disease of cholera, but his contamination of envy. So, even when insulted, quite different than King Rahugana, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was compassionate to Tiksha. So these are scriptural examples that if you read the scripture you can understand. To become pure in devotion, You have to follow the proper standards according to your position in society, the social structure, message, varnashram. And you have to have qualities of a human being to do that. So that's Bhagavatam's explanation of how to develop varnashram, become a human for starters. So, and when you do all of those things and you're in proper association of devotees, you can develop devotion like Prabhu had. Now you're going to start moving more quickly. So sometimes we find these things in scripture that look like they're saying two different things. Varnashram, no varnashram. And how do you give weight to those statements? You have to see the big picture. Big picture. What's the full message of our founder Acharya on this topic? Not just something over here. Aha, that supports what I say. It doesn't support what you say, you try to hide it. Or minimize it or something. Here's another nice one. A famous letter. This is beside Prabhupada's books. He wrote a letter, famous letter to Karandar, who was the temple president of Los Angeles. Prabhupada called this the western headquarters of ISKCON. Krishna consciousness movement is for training men to be independently thoughtful and competent in all kinds of departments of knowledge and action, not for making bureaucracy. So, I'm probably not the only ISKCON leader that have had devotees read this, and there's one word in this statement that they really pick up on, and that's independent. Prabhupada wants us to be independently thoughtful. So that's what I'm doing. I'm being independent. I'm thoughtfully independent. Our leaders shall be careful not to kill the spirit of enthusiastic service, which is individual. That's me. I'm this individual, independent individual, thoughtful, spontaneous and voluntary. Look out, here I come. Now, there's the bigger part of the message. There's one of those qualifying messages. The highest achievement of perfect civilization is to work with valor, but at the same time depend completely on the Lord. In the case of our transcendental relation with the Lord, it is the most fortunate case where we can live completely dependent on Him. This is from Queen Kunti's prayers, prophets, reports. So there's this necessity sometimes. I don't need to elaborate. Anyone who's read Prabhupada's books will find over here he says this, and over there he says that, and you're scratching your head. How do you work this out? So I'm going to now, that's a little bit why, then some what, and now here's some how to read. And one of the things that's important to read is to understand the source. And the source is this compassionate person that himself crossed the ocean of material existence and wants to give us the opportunity to do the same. When he was giving his Bhaktivedanta purports, he's with Krishna. And he's reaching into our realm to give us that transcendental message in a way that's palpable and digestible and baby palatable, basically, so we can digest it and assimilate it. How am I doing with time? Can I tell another Prabhupada story? Are we pressed for time? How are we doing?
One story wouldn't hurt.
One story wouldn't hurt. Okay. Once upon a time, Prabhupada was visiting Los Angeles. I'll tell the shorter version. And after arriving at the airport, when there wasn't TSA, everyone could go to the gate. So there were a few hundred devotees at the gate. And they were docile. They were having kirtan. And when Prabhupada came out of the gate, it was like all over the place. And flower petals and conch shells, and security thought these people are crazy. And then they brought Prabhupada to the temple. He gave a public lecture in the temple room. Then he went to his quarters. And his quarters in Los Angeles are quite tiny. I don't know if anybody's been there. You know, so the place was packed, and Prabhupada looking around the room, and everyone's smiling, waiting for Prabhupada to say something brilliant. So he said something brilliant. He said, I know that my devotees love me very much, and you're always asking, what is Prabhupada doing? And you say, Prabhupada is now in Delhi, and he's gone to these places and met with those people, and then soon he's going to go to Japan. And then in Japan he did this, and then he went to Hong Kong, and then Australia, New Zealand, and then more detail in Hawaii. Now he's come to Los Angeles. But I want you all to know, I am always with Krishna. Jai Prabhupada. So when we're reading the Bhagavatam purports, we should be aware the person who we're hearing from is with Krishna. And he's just rendering a service to us because we need it. And it's getting a little restless in the wings over here. Can we close that door? Can we close that door? I better hurry up and finish, huh? Oh, 5:30. Oh my goodness. Well, okay. I'll skip what this is. I'll skip what that is. And it's very important when we're reading. Well, hermeneutics, this word at the bottom, it's a nice word, nice fancy English word. It means methodology of how to read a text. It's commonly used with reading the Bible, and it's become a popular word, becoming a popular word in ISKCON of how to read Prabhupada's books. What's the methodology for how to understand any topic, whatever that topic might be, deity worship or something. So when reading, it's important that you extend your consciousness. This is the how to read. You extend your consciousness to transcendence. Just like the name, so also Bhagavatam and the Bhaktivedanta purports, they're of this realm of transcendence, and you're privileged to touch transcendence, although our capacity is very covered and quite limited and anemic. It gives us strength, it gives us health, it gives us vigor, vitality, clarity, transcendental knowledge, even in our dark position. There's this nice Sanskrit word, is sankalpa, means intention. So when you're reading, understand the founder Acharya is reaching out to you, and he's giving you the opportunity to go to Krishna. So read with that intention. This is my opportunity to go to Krishna through sound vibration. Now, faith, well, Scripture tells us in order to practice bhakti, you have to have faith, and if you just need faith, then why do you need so many scriptures? Well, there's different kinds of faith. According to Jiva Goswami, there's faith that's from Scripture, and there's faith that's just customary, or conventional, or family tradition, like that. So, a nice example, here's two. Krishna asked Nanda Maharaj, when he saw all this on the lower left, he saw a big yajna being assembled, he asked, Nanda Maharaj, is this festival something that's enjoined in the Scriptures, or is it family tradition? And if it's enjoined in the Scriptures, please tell me the purpose, because if you do something that's enjoined in the Scriptures, you don't know why, you don't get the full effect. But it's not to say that family tradition is a 0. It's not a 10. And a 10 is a 10. It's enjoined we must do. And if you don't know what the Scripture says, you're in a problem, like this one. The cat in the box problem. There's different versions of this, but one of them is, the one I like most, is in India, in South India, there was a temple that the pujari would every day, 4 times a day, make offerings, And when he would make the offering, he'd ring a bell. And when he put the offering in front of the deity and ring the bell, it was a signal for the mouse to come and eat the offering. And so he's a Brahmin, he knew what to do. He got a cat. The cat took care of the mouse, but then when he was ringing the bell, the cat came and rubbed his leg against the pujari. So he's a smart man, he knew what to do. He put that cat in a box and put a little string around the cat's neck and tied the string to a post, and then he made the offering. And that went on for some years, 15, 20 years, and then the priest died, and the successors understood in order to make the offering, you have to get a black cat with a cat in the box, put a string around the cat's neck and tie the string to a post, and then you can make the offering. Because he didn't know what Scripture said. And my dear devotees, it's happening in ISKCON, not the cat in the box, but things that people don't know because they're not trained, and we need training in all fields, not only in deity worship. So some people that don't have scriptural basis, they're looking for, I get letters. You know, their inspiration is a dream that they had, or some miracle, or some far-out feeling, and what's wrong? I'm not getting any far-out feeling. What am I doing wrong? But Prabhupada didn't encourage us in that way. He encouraged us grounded in Scripture, trained us again and again and again. Listen to his recorded lectures and conversations and everything. It's based in Scripture. And those that are based in Scripture, they can endure any difficulty. They don't need miracles to prove something. Now, Prabhupada was a perfect example of that. The ordeals that he passed through and the opportunities that he met and took advantage of. So many wonderful stories we don't have time for. And to support that, he provided us with ample literature. He wanted, whenever there was a public program, there was a full display of his literature. It was standard. If there wasn't a full display of his literature, you heard it. One other last Prabhupada story. In this Brooklyn Henry Street Temple, there was a group of devotees that had formed a dramatic troupe. Previously, they had professional acting experience in Manhattan. They had all become devotees around the same time, so they formed this group called Vaikuntha Players. And every time Prabhupada came, they had a whole year long prepared this elaborate drama. And it was this big, exciting, festive thing. Prabhupada sat right in the middle of the audience, and they performed for Prabhupada. I can tell you, Prabhupada didn't like any time there was laughter from the audience. It stopped immediately because he didn't like it. He said, "This is serious." He didn't like comedy. Anyway, and then they just did this every year, and after some time they decided, let's go take this to the public. So when Prabhupada came one year, they said, "Prabhupada, you did this in the public. His first question, how many Bhagavad Gitas did you sell?" We forgot to read the Bhagavad Gitas, Prabhupada. You must just have a full display of my books. He wanted people to be educated, to cross the ocean of material existence. So, my dear devotees, please study Prabhupada's books. Help us make sure that there's ISKCON 100, and that's how you can serve Prabhupada. Sorry for running over time, feels like this.
Srila Prabhupada ki jai. So I'd like to request these sponsors today to please come up and perform.